Sometimes, the most uncomfortable Bible stories are the ones that teach us the deepest lessons. This is one of those stories. It is the story of a young prophet, faithful, brave, and obedient at first, whose life ended suddenly and tragically. Not because he never heard God, but because, at a critical moment, he listened to the wrong voice. This story comes from 1 Kings, chapter 13. It takes place during a troubled time in Israel's history, when the nation was divided and spiritual confusion was everywhere. After King Solomon died, Israel split into two kingdoms. Jeroboam became king over the northern tribes, but instead of leading the people to worship God as he had commanded, Jeroboam set up golden altars and encouraged idol worship. It looked religious on the outside, but it was disobedient at its core. God saw what was happening, and he acted. He sent a young prophet from the land of Judah with a very clear mission. This prophet was told to travel to the city of Bethel and speak directly against the altar Jeroboam had built. God gave him a strong message of judgment and a sign to confirm it. But along with the message, God also gave the prophet very specific instructions. He was not to eat any food in that place, he was not to drink any water, and he was not to return home by the same road he used to get there. There were no conditions, no exceptions, and no room for interpretation. The prophet obeyed. He traveled to Bethel and boldly spoke God's message in front of King Jeroboam and the people. He declared that the altar would one day be torn down and exposed as false. Jeroboam was furious. He stretched out his hand and ordered the prophet to be arrested. But suddenly, the king's hand became paralyzed. At the same moment, the altar split apart, just as the prophet had said it would. The crowd watched in shock. Terrified, Jeroboam begged the prophet to pray for him. The prophet did, and the king's hand was healed instantly. Grateful and amazed, Jeroboam invited the prophet to come home with him, to eat, drink, and receive a reward. But the prophet refused. He explained that God had commanded him not to eat or drink in that place, no matter what. And so, he turned away and left the city, continuing his journey just as God had instructed. Up to this point, everything had gone exactly as it should. But nearby lived an old prophet. When he heard what had happened at the altar, he became curious. He saddled his donkey and rode out to find the young prophet. When he caught up with him on the road, the old prophet invited him home for a meal. Once again, the young prophet refused and repeated God's command. But then the old prophet said something that changed everything. He claimed that an angel had spoken to him, saying that the young prophet should return with him and eat and drink. It sounded spiritual. It sounded trustworthy. It even sounded like it came from God. But it was a lie, and the young prophet believed it. He turned back. He went into the old prophet's house. He ate food and drank water. He disobeyed the clear instruction God had given him. While they were sitting at the table, something unexpected happened. God spoke, but not to the young prophet. God spoke through the old prophet, announcing judgment. Because the young prophet had disobeyed God's command, he would not return home alive. The meal ended in silence. The young prophet mounted his donkey and continued his journey. But along the road, a lion attacked him and killed him. Yet even this moment carried meaning. The lion did not eat the prophet's body. It did not harm the donkey. It simply stood beside the body, as if guarding it. People passing by saw the scene and were stunned. When the old prophet heard the news, he knew immediately what it meant. He retrieved the body and buried the young prophet in his own tomb. He mourned him deeply and acknowledged that the message the young prophet spoke would surely come true. And it did. The altar Jeroboam built was eventually destroyed, just as God had declared. The altar Jeroboam built was eventually destroyed, just as God had declared. This story is not easy to hear. It raises serious questions. Why was the punishment so severe? Why did God allow deception? Why did the prophet have to die? The Bible does not explain every detail, but it makes the lessons unmistakably clear. Obedience matters. God's instructions are not cancelled by another voice that sounds spiritual, and not everyone who speaks in God's name is truly speaking for Him. The young prophet obeyed publicly but compromised privately, and partial obedience, in the end, was still disobedience. Yet even in this tragic story, God's word did not fail. His message stood firm, even when the messenger fell. This story is not meant to frighten us. It is meant to awaken us, to remind us to listen carefully, to test what we hear, and to stay faithful to what God has already said. Because faithfulness is not only about how boldly we begin the journey, but how carefully we stay on the path.